The threat of the Shinju is a genuine problem for the characters of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex. With Jura establishing a goal for each specific Shinju, it almost seems inevitable that at least one of the Shinju will reach that point. And by point, I'm obviously referring to them consuming their target. It's a massive plot point in the series, and I would be extremely surprised if we don't get to see at least one instance of a Shinju consuming their target. But then comes the question, which one of them will be the first to do it? Well, in this video, I'm going to discuss which Shinju I think will reach their goal, which ones won't, and also who will be the first victim of Shinju consumption. But before we get into that, you may have noticed I haven't been uploading for the past month, and to be honest with all of you, I was just massively burnt out. And I also felt quite demotivated just by the sheer number of people who said my voice was unbearable at the time. But I feel refreshed now, and hopefully my voice doesn't annoy all of you anymore. Also, for the month of February, I'm going to be trying something different. I normally burn myself out from editing, as I try to only put out quality content. But for this month, there will be next to no editing for the majority of the videos. And I will also be attempting to upload daily. But at the end of each week, I want to introduce a segment called Theory of the Week. But I'll make a community post where you guys post your Boruto theories. And then I'm either going to pick my favorite theory from the post or potentially do a reaction video to all of the theories on the post. So if you want to see that sort of content, then let me know, as I'm excited to see if that's something that you guys would be interested in. Anyways, with that all said, let's get into this video. Alrighty, so I think I want to structure this video from least likely to most likely, and at the end of the video do a little guess on who will be the first to fall victim to the Shinju. So my least likely spot to get consumed, I have got Sarada. Now this one is certainly close between the next person on the list, but I have Sarada edging this one just because of the impact her getting consumed would actually have. Yes, this would cause a massive emotional reaction inside of Boruto and all of Sarada's peers, motivating them to deal with the Shinju more quickly, and potentially being the trigger for Boruto's awakening of the jougan, but realistically there are much better characters that you can do this to other than Sarada. Sarada is already established as one of the main protagonists of this story. She has a lot of character progression to eventually reach, and it would make sense to build her up in a way where her character's purpose is to improve in power and as a person. But what it wouldn't make sense to do is midway through this character arc to have her repurposed and stripped from the story, obviously in the way of her getting consumed by Hidari. Her fight with the Shinju, in my eyes at least, technically her way of wrapping up this character arc for her, but she almost finds herself mentally and physically, and her defeating Hidari will show immense growth as a character, because for her to be able to go toe to toe with one of the Shinju, that would just be a massive feat for her. And then obviously it being her father behind the mask, it just makes for a great moment that we can look forward to in the future. The story would be like defeated the first time, to then overcome adversity and defeat Hidari the second time, and also inadvertently saving her father in the process. Plus I don't see the writers realistically killing off Sarada in that way, with her being a part of the new big three, and also supposedly having a role beyond the scope of the Battle of Jura. And I'm referring to restoring Boruto's position in Konoha, and almost acting as the light to dispel the impeding darkness, which is Ada's omnipotence, which is also reflected in them having contrasting dojutsu. And realistically, I just don't see Sarada getting consumed under any circumstances. So I'm going to give this one a 1% chance of happening, and yeah, I'm going to do a percentage of the target being consumed on each person, so make sure to leave your odds of each person being consumed in the comments down below, as I'd like to see how you guys compare to what I think. Anyways, moving on to the next least likely candidate to get consumed by the Shinju, I have Himawari. Like I said earlier, very close to being lower than Sarada in terms of likelihood of occurring. But I just think with her role in the story thus far, it just makes a little bit more sense than it would in Sarada's situation. Himawari's role in the story has never really stood out as someone who could take over as a main character. That's why it was such a big surprise to me in particular to see her become so insanely powerful with Kurama re-entering the story, and also now her seemingly limitless potential. Because previously, if she hadn't been shown to undergo such a large awakening, she would definitely be number one on my list as most likely to get consumed. That is because she served as almost just a motivator for Boruto and Kawaki, and maybe even Naruto, as someone that they need to protect, as she is just so innocent and weak, and a lot of their actions were just to create a safer world to protect her from all of the world's problems. But if she were to be consumed in that scenario, then it would act as an even larger motivator for people like Boruto to grow stronger. And also that insane guilt of doing all this work to protect Himawari and then still coming short, it's the same guilt that Boruto felt when Sasuke was consumed, but it'll be multiplied even more since this is his sister. And he also failed to protect her while Naruto couldn't, since while her parents are gone, Boruto has to act as her guardian angel. And this also would have acted as the perfect way for Boruto's jougan once again, due to obviously how close Himawari was to Boruto. But now the situation has changed dramatically. It's now become clear that the writers want to keep Himawari in the story as a main character, and that's pretty obvious with how they wrote her next power up, saying that she has even higher potential than Naruto does, which obviously suggests that she will be able to get to the level and fight alongside alongside Boruto and Kawaki. And this was always the goal of Himawari's, to be able to grow strong and fight alongside Boruto, slightly reducing the massive burden he always has to take on alone. And on top of this, the fact that Kashin Koji said that as long as Himawari's in the village, she is safe, it also makes it pretty clear that she isn't going anywhere for the time being, as now it makes sense for her character to pivot into a role where she can actually fight and grow as a character. Again, there is almost a limitless potential to Himawari with her lack of control over Kurama at the moment, as well as her lack of control over her healing capabilities. If she was able to harness those powers correctly, then it means that she will be able to become insanely strong, but what this also means is that for her to be able to fulfill this progression, she cannot be able to die. But the reason I don't have her below or at the same level as Sarada is because her death to the Shinju would still have a massive impact to certain characters as well as the story in a much bigger way than it would in Sarada's case. As with Sarada, her character almost has to stay in the story for her to fulfill a purpose, whereas Himawari can die and still have usefulness when it comes to progressing the story. But with that said, I'm going to give Himawari a 5% chance of being consumed. I don't see it happening realistically, but there is definitely a possibility that is there. Anyways, moving on, we are going into a slightly more probable scenario, where if this were to happen, I would not be completely shocked, but that's not to say I see it being inevitable, but at the same time, I'm definitely going to keep it in mind as a possibility of happening. But yeah, next up on the list, we have Ada. Now, Ada is definitely a weird one. I'm definitely debating her purpose in both her own life and in the story as a whole. And the reason I say that is because it seems like her character almost lacks purpose in life, as if you think back to part 1 of Boruto, Ada's one and only goal was to get closer or end up dating Kawaki. She had this huge burden of false love directed towards her by everyone around her that she didn't feel like anyone could truly love her. But with the knowledge that Kawaki was unaffected, she hoped that by getting closer to Kawaki, he could fulfill the huge gaping hole in her heart. However, in Blue Vortex thus far, it's been extremely clear that despite her getting extremely close to Kawaki, that hole in her heart has not been fulfilled. And this also means that we have the sense that her character has no direction. But with many statements from Ada herself alluding to the fact that maybe she has changed her sights to Boruto, it once again reignites that passion to live or giving her a goal in the story that allows her character to still serve a purpose. But without Boruto and without her constant pursuit for Kawaki, it would definitely make sense for her to be killed off by Mamushi, as it would motivate Damon to get stronger and join the fight, which currently it seems pretty clear that he has no interest in the Shinju whatsoever, and his only goal in life is to protect Ada. But if he were to fail to do this to the likes of Mamushi, it would definitely give him a lot of motivation to fight against the Shinju. Ada isn't necessarily close to anyone in particular. She has this sort of love triangle going on with Sarada and Sumire, but as far as that goes, it's not really going to take her anywhere in the story. And it almost feels like she's controlling these two just purely out of fear, as Sarada and Sumire clearly just don't want to get on the wrong side of Damon. Ada's death almost seems to outweigh her remaining in the story if, and that is a big if, she doesn't continue to pursue love or fulfillment inside of anyone. And the reason I believe that this is the only way for her to not get consumed is because, like I've described, having Ada killed off not only will give us a big insight into why Shinju have specific targets, it would also just make sense given how broken her dojutsu is. And just writing her off would get rid of such an overpowered ability. But if she were to pursue Boruto, it would give her character a purpose once again, giving her an actual reason to be a character to watch and care for, especially for us readers. Characters only remain in stories if they have compelling character progression to undergo, or at least a purpose in the story. And if I'm honest, if I don't see something like I just described for Ada to end up occurring, I think there is a real chance that she's just going to end up getting consumed. However, in defense of her remaining in the story as a character, she is the one who casted this darkness or facade over the world, so it would certainly feel a little bit weird if she were to die and we just end up never seeing this issue ever resolved, as I do believe that Sarada will have to combat Ada's Senrigan using her own sharingan, with the design of the sun and the moon being obviously so contrasting. It kind of makes sense for Ada to be alive while Sarada fights against this omnipotence. Regardless, I'm going to give the probability of Ada being consumed a solid 35%. I can definitely see it happening because she is a very volatile character. But yeah, moving on, this next character I genuinely think is a coin flip on whether they end up getting consumed, and this is Gaara. Now, I don't have much to say about Gaara specifically, since his presence in Blue Vortex isn't too big. He just kind of lurks around in the background and you forget he even exists until he pops back up into the story. So technically speaking, he could certainly get consumed, and that wouldn't really change anything in the story whatsoever. And that's why it does make sense for him to end up getting consumed. But despite this, him being consumed or not, contrary to the characters thus far, has slightly more of a broader impact. And that's because if Gaara were to be consumed, it would mean that the mission to save Shinki and Gaara would be a failure. And the reason this is important is because because of the impact it has on the characters on this mission, primarily Sarada, Mitsuki, and Konohamaru, and I kind of want to focus on specifically Sarada. Thus far in Two Blue Vortex, Sarada's mangekyou sharingan has eluded us, and on top of this, Sarada does have to get much stronger to be able to fight with either against Hidari or ultimately against Jura with Boruto, and Gaara being consumed could act as a motivator for her to both trigger the large emotional reaction in her and showing her that she isn't strong enough right now and she needs to train a lot harder, subsequently triggering the mangekyou sharingan in the moment and also causing her to train later in the story to get much stronger and be able to fight on par with Hidari like I described just a moment ago. And the same would go for Konohamaru and Mitsuki, where their power-ups are less clear-cut and obvious as it is for Sarada, but failing this mission would serve as a reality check that they need to grow in power tremendously and quickly at that. And with them being main characters in the story, it almost makes sense to give them direct motivation to train and grow, and hence giving them a pathway to get to the level of Boruto, or at least the Shinju, to actually have meaningful showings in the inevitable final battle. I also think, like I described with Ada, and I will with the next person on the list, is a perfect way for us to find out why is Jura so obsessed with the Shinju finding and consuming their targets. And we will also get to see what really happens when a Shinju consumes its target. But the reason I believe that this is not going to happen 100% is because it feels if Gaara isn't consumed on this mission, he will never actually end up being consumed. And on the contrary, this could alternatively be the perfect time to see how the Thorn Soul actually works by saving Shinki. And ultimately, the reason I believe that this is number 2 over number 1 is because the number 1 literally has the exact same reasons for consumption as Gaara, but to a more extreme level. So I'm going to give this a 50% chance of happening. It's really impossible to tell how this mission will go, but all I know is someone is going to get eaten on that mission, and that takes me on to my number 1 spot, which is Mr. Konohamaru. Now I don't want to go too in depth into why I think he will get consumed, as I would literally just be repeating myself on what I said about Gaara. But to be brief, Konohamaru doesn't really serve much of a purpose in the story anymore. He has outlived his role as the leader of Team 7, he has no real direction as a character, with his only potential goal in life to be to free Moegi, and also there is no meaningful pathway for him to grow in strength and be relevant by the end of the story. And I think this is very intentional from the writers in the way they've written his character. It always seemed as though Konohamaru was capped in terms of power at this high Jonin, low Kage sort of level, and this always made it seem like his character was just straight trash, with him taking more L's than my boy Code does. And his role was purely just to be a mentor for Team 7, giving them direction and guidance towards their growth as shinobi. But he has since been surpassed in those 3 years, and his role to provide Team 7 with wisdom has long been gone, with them all having their own goals and morals in life by this point. So with his purpose being gone, much like I described with Ada, it makes sense to have him killed off, but to an even larger extent than it does with Ada, because Ada's goals and desires can be reignited, but with Konohamaru, it just doesn't feel like that's the case. And honestly, I think if it doesn't happen here, he's still gonna die sooner or later. Because if you think about it, much like I described with what would happen if Gaara was consumed, if Konohamaru did die, it would provide actually relevant characters with insane potential in the form of Mitsuki and Sarada, even more motivation to grow in terms of power. And the reason this is amplified with Konohamaru is because he's literally their sensei. So they are much more emotionally attached to Konohamaru than they would be with Gaara. And it would also show them literally how their lack of power, and in Sarada's case competence, on this mission, where a lack of concentration on this mission would end up costing our sensei of 5 years his life. Which if that ain't motivation, then I don't know what is. And inadvertently, it would give Boruto even more motivation, like he didn't already have enough to grow stronger and defeat the Shinju. And also with where the current mission to save Shinki is going, I think it would actually make a bit more sense for Konohamaru due to the mental nerf he is clearly having from seeing an entity so reminiscent of Moegi, his childhood crush or friend. It could make sense to have Matsuri play with this emotion, as the Shinju have shown that they are capable of having a deceptive nature. And after falling for Matsuri's trap, this is how Konohamaru gets consumed, which will then trigger an awakening in Sarada and Mitsuki, most likely causing them to be able to go toe to toe with one of these Shinju. As like I've been saying, Konohamaru is almost turned into a Himawari, where his only purpose is to provide motivation to the main cast in the story. So finally, my number 1 pick for most likely to get consumed by the Shinju, for Konohamaru, I'm gonna give this guy a 75% chance of happening. As I believe even if this doesn't happen on this mission, I still think there is a very high chance afterwards he still ends up getting consumed by Matsuri. And on top of that, we get a 2-for-1 deal if Konohamaru gets consumed. We probably get to see Sarada's mangekyou mangekyou there and then. But like I've been banging on about, we also get to see what happens if a target gets consumed, and also we get to see if Sarada's mangekyou is busted enough to allow her to get to a Shinju level threat. But also, if Sarada's mangekyou sharingan is busted enough, we will get to see what happens when a Shinju is restored back to their original host. And in the start of the video, I said I would discuss who I thought would be the first instead of who is most likely on top of this, and to be honest, it's plain and simple, it's either Gaara or Konohamaru. Whichever one of them gets consumed on this mission, as one of them probably won't come, as someone getting consumed likely won't happen sooner than the end of this mission. And also, since 2 Shinju have shown up, it's pretty clear that someone's about to turn into a Shinju's dinner. But on top of that, with there being more Shinju that are probably going to end up showing up, if you want me to do a video discussing who will actually be the most likely to become a Shinju, then let me know in the comments down below. Also, while you're down there, make sure to leave your thoughts on this video with, like I said, your probabilities as well as anything you want to add or disagree with. But with that said, that is going to be a wrap for this video. If you did enjoy, then be sure to like the video just so it gets pushed out to more and more people. And also, if you are enjoying the content at the moment and want to see more in the future, then be sure to subscribe so YouTube knows to recommend my videos to you when they get released. And like I said, I'm going to be trying to upload every single day in February. So if you want to see more videos like this, then make sure to subscribe. As like I just said, it's the best way of getting these videos pushed to you. But with that all said, I hope you enjoyed and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.